Hi, and welcome to Tuesday Community Connections. I have to admit, these days my heart is heavy and sad, and even though the sunshine can be out and the weather be nice, it still doesn't make as much difference as it always does or usually does for me when it's beautiful weather outside. As I look at our culture and our community and what's going on, it just tears me apart, and it makes me very sad. These days that we're living through and how we look at one another and how we treat one another. Today is Cody Holte's funeral. Cody Holte was the police officer, a member of Sharon, who was killed doing his job last week, helping others who needed some help. Nothing that should have been very violent, nothing that should have ended his life, but because violence happened and anger came out, Cody lost his life, and so today we have his funeral. And then we look at what's going on in Minneapolis with the death of a person for seemingly a no good reason. Someone whose life was, again, ended short for a reason that should not have been. And then all of the protests and all of the violence and all of the anger that's going on. I'm not saying that there isn't a reason to be angry at death that should not have happened, but at the same time to go to the violence and to burning down the buildings. I also realize that the protesters and those doing all the violence aren't the same people, that there are some who just are there for violence. Protesters can be loud and protesters need to make their voices heard so that we can change, but there's a fine line between protesting and then moving over to violence. And so we live in these days where there's anger directed at others that turns to disrespect and violence and even taking of life. I don't know any time that anger has solved any problems, especially when it turns violence. That doesn't solve anything. Anger only ups the ante and makes anger come back again. And in the middle of all of this and where we're at right now is that life seems to have little or no value. If you don't agree with me, if I don't like you, if I think that you're different than me in ways that I don't like, then I can call you bad, I can put you down, I can take your life, and that, in a sense, is my right. Who are we as people? What is it that makes us think and feel that way? What is it that has us so angry that we can't see beyond hurting or getting angry with others or becoming violent and not being able to sit down and to talk or at least walk away peacefully from one another? Think a little bit about the creation story. I mean, it takes a whole chapter, 2 chapters really, in the book of Genesis. And in that book, in Genesis, what we read is step by step, God created. Now, God could have, maybe did, create the whole world in 1 second, one bang. I mean, there is nothing that God could not do, right? Could have been that all of a sudden the earth was there with everything in it and you and I and all of the buildings and everything that we have. God could have done that. God is all powerful. That isn't what God did. God took care. God step by step created the world. And however long it took to create doesn't really matter as much as we know that it was God that was creating. It was intentional creating. And as we read in Genesis 1, after each day, God created one part of the world and looked and said that it was good. And then God created people, humans, you and me, the beginning, our ancestors. God created them with great care. God knew intimately each person that he created. We read that as well in the book of Psalms, that before I was born, you knew me, and you knit me together. You knit me, you put me together in my mother's womb, made me to be who I am. I'm meant to be the person that I am, and you are meant to be the person that you are. And everyone is meant to be the person that they are, the person God created them to be. God created the world and you and me and all people with great love and with great care. So then how is it that we treat each other? How do we see each other? Where do we have respect for life, or how do we have respect for life? If we see people as God's creation, what are we saying about God? And what are we saying about the people that God created. The great commandment that Jesus gave us was that you shall love the Lord your God with all of your heart and with all of your soul and with all of your strength and with all of your mind, and you shall love your neighbor as yourself. Your neighbor. People that God created. People that God intentionally made to be who they are. Different than we are. Made to give us some depth and some breadth and to share gifts with one another so that there's a lot of variety and a lot of joy, a lot of blessing in life and all that it is. God created each one of us. I mean, who is it that God did not create? Who is it that God doesn't love or doesn't care about? And then part of what makes me sad is, how is it then that we speak about one another, this child of God? How do we treat other people, beings and children that God created? How do we look at and how do we see each other? God looks through eyes of love and forgiveness and care and attention. How do we? I wonder if we could just start by seeing that this other person, whether we like them or not, whether we agree with them or not, but first of all, they are a child of God, created by God. They might be causing problems. They might not be people that we understand at all, but they are a child of God. God created them. God created all of us. Now think about it. This truly is a time for you and for me to be the church, to live what the church is about. I mean, being the church is more than going to worship once a week, whether it be a Sunday or a Wednesday. It's much more than giving money to a church. It's much more than having your name on a membership list. It's being the church. I mean, we say at the end of worship, go in peace, serve the Lord. Go be the church. And we say at every baptism as we give the candle, let your light so shine before others. Let the light of God's presence glow in the world so that others might see it and know God's presence. That's what we're called to be, especially during these times where there's divisions and where there's anger and even where there's violence. We're called to be different. We're called to love one another. We're called to see children of God. It's been said, and I've seen it many times in the past months in particular, but hurt people hurt people. People who are hurting others are themselves hurt. And maybe for those of us who are watching, we need to look and ask, where is the hurt that this is coming from? What is it that they're feeling that causes them to reach out in anger? What needs do they have that maybe we can help? Why is it that they need to hurt others? And how is it that maybe we can reach out in friendship and see if we can show a different side or show a different way to behave? I know by doing that, we're not going to change the entire world. We might not even change the whole community. But we can change one life, perhaps. And we can make our lives be a reflection of who God is in the world and what God has called us to be. We can be that which shows that light that shines brightly, the light of God's love, the light of wholeness and peace that God comes with. Jesus said, I've come to give you life and that you might have life and that you might live it abundantly. When we're angry all the time, when we have sides, when the way to solve problems is through violence and anger, it certainly isn't abundant life, is it? How can we turn that around? How can we show love? How can we, even in small ways, begin to show to our young people, our kids as we bring them up, that it's not being at one another, it's not being violent, it's not hurting one another that we get ahead, but by caring for one another, by living as children of God, by loving one another as God loved us. I'm reminded of that story that you probably have heard many times, and I have too. It's an old story, but it's a great one, about a young boy who after a storm on the ocean, was walking along the beach, and there were starfish lying all over the sand, and he saw all of these starfish lying there. Now, they can't live on the sand. They need to be in the water. And so as he was walking along, he would pick up the starfish that he saw and throw them back into the ocean, one at a time, standing some places for a long time, picking up all of the starfish and throwing them back into the ocean. And then another man came by and asked him what he was doing, and this young boy said, "I'm throwing these starfish back into the ocean so that they can live." And the old man, who believed he was much wiser, said, "Look at all of these. You can't make any difference. I mean, you can throw some back, but what difference is it going to make?" And the young boy wisely answered, as he threw another starfish back into the ocean, "It makes a difference to this one." I want to challenge us. Can we make a difference to one? Can we start looking in love at those that we have a difficult time loving? Can we first see other people as children of God, as a creation of God? Can we find ways to go out of our way to show that we care about one another? And maybe one at a time the ripples will begin. And maybe just in a small part of our world, God's love will be seen and felt and known in new ways. That's what we need. Not anger, not violence, not putting one another down, but reaching out in love, reaching out to be God's hands and feet so that all the world might know that God is here, that God is a God of love, that each one of us matter, and that each one of us are meant to be who we are, this special creation of God. So as you go about the week, find ways to love, find ways to show God's presence, find ways to begin a whole new way of looking at others and of changing our world. And God bless you as you go out and serve the Lord by being the church. Thank you.